What's up? What's happening, folks? Welcome back to the channel, Sports, Life, and Politics TV. I'm Samuel Koppel, and I'm here for the news. And this is a be continued, a part 2 of Do You Believe in Aliens? And are aliens real? Little docu-series here I'm doing. And obviously in part 1, shit got real wacky. Borderline out of control, some of the government waste and spending. And now we're realizing that a lot of this shit is a complete joke. And a lot of these people who selling us this alien shit, they're just trying to make a quick buck, whether it be through books, documentaries, movies, television shows, government grants and funding and all type of shit. But we're going to pick up this video and continue the rest of this part 2. Let's play the video.
And that it was determined that there were other higher priority issues that merited funding. James Lakatsky says he spent the next few years trying to get new funding to resurrect the dead program and to keep the paranormal investigations going, but he was unsuccessful. Finally, Lakatsky says he retired in 2016.
And that is the mostly untold story about how $22 million in taxpayer money was spent on a wacky paranormal funhouse. And it appears that at the time, the Pentagon had no idea this silly, spooky stuff was even happening. How is that possible? Well, Lakatsky, the Pentagon director of the program, says that for security reasons, he was hiding OSAP's activities from officials at the Pentagon.
People in my own office, they didn't know what we were doing. They had no idea that I was running Skinwalker Ranch. They had no idea whatsoever.
And was Harry Reid aware of the ghosts and goblins? Well, I guess it depends on which version of his story you want to believe. In 2018, in an interview with New York Magazine, Reid denied ever being briefed or updated on any of OSAP's activities. Ever? Ever. But then in 2021, Reid told George Knapp that not only was he aware of OSAP's activities at Skinwalker Ranch, but that he was potentially planning to go to the ranch himself.
Him saying he potentially would go, he already had been to the ranch several times, allegedly. That's why he put that out there, just in case somebody found out that he was there. Yeah, I was potentially going to go. Well, actually, I did go. You know what I mean? It's not a far step from potentially to, yeah, I was there. So that's why he said it like that. But Harry Reid, Senator Harry Reid, he knew the whole time this shit was a hoax. He's been to that goddamn ranch, Skinwalker Ranch. And like I said before, me personally, I think it was a pedophile's dreamland. Like they said, a paranormal Disneyland. I think it was more of a pedophile Disneyland. And like I said, who knows what other type of wacky ass, disgusting and foul and demonic shit that was going on at Skinwalker Ranch.
I remember getting a call from you while you're in the well of the Senate, and you asked about Skinwalker Ranch, whether your staffers should go there, whether they'd be safe. Did you consider sending some of your people to the ranch, and did you ever consider going there yourself?
I considered it, but based on information I got from you and others, I decided not to go.
It would also draw attention to the ranch and the program, right? If you went there, you'd have to tell somebody about it.
That's for sure.
And Senator Reid would eventually fully endorse this whole crazy story 2 months before his death by writing the foreword to Lakatsky's book. In it, he calls out the New York Times.
The December 2017 New York Times story has done a tremendous amount of good, but unfortunately, it has also muddied the waters. It left the government's OSAP program completely out of the narrative.
Yeah! Why wasn't any of this stuff reported in that bombshell 2017 New York Times article? How did a story about a program called OSAP, which investigated U.F.O.s, werewolves, ghosts, goblins, become a story about a program called ATIP, which only investigated UFOs?
Well, Leslie Kean is a longtime UFO believer and UFO researcher, writing UFO stories going back decades. She wrote a best-selling book on UFOs in 2010. And it was Leslie Kean who approached Ralph Blumenthal to pitch the big UFO story to the New York Times. She was one of the authors of the New York Times article.
In a recent Showtime documentary, Leslie Kean was asked why stories about alleged encounters with alien creatures were not included in her 2017 New York Times article. And she replied that her specific goal with that article was to give UFOs credibility. So she avoided reporting on some things.
I chose not to focus on it because the angle that I was taking in my reporting was to try to get credibility for the subject, and I knew that that was not the way to go. That was not the first step in terms of getting people to accept this.
So an author of the original New York Times article, the article that was the first domino to fall in all of this, says she wrote the article with a specific angle in mind. Get people to accept UFOs as real. That sounds like the goal of an activist, not a journalist. But I see where she's coming from. Because could you imagine if that first New York Times article had talked about werewolves and poltergeists and giant dino beavers? It would have been laughed at and ridiculed and used as a prime example of the government wasting taxpayer money. But because all of that wasn't mentioned, and only unidentified flying objects were, that New York Times article continues to validate UFOs with not just your average citizen, but also with members of Congress.
Since the New York Times story came out in December 2017, it's politically viable for elected officials to come forward and say, I support this kind of research. But that's for researching things in the sky that might be a threat to national security or to aviation safety. It's another matter for a politician to say, I agree with spending money to investigate places like Skinwalker Ranch with spooky stories of boogeymen and werewolves. No politician is going to fund poltergeist research or looking into werewolves. They'd be crucified.
So how much of the actual story did the original New York Times article report? How much of the actual story is currently influencing Congress?
The scope of the OSAP program was gigantic compared to the small sliver of information that was reported via the New York Times. And so the purpose of the book was really to set the record straight. I think the book really encapsulates about 97% of OSAP, whereas the 3% was what the New York Times article had described.
3%. According to those actually in charge of the actual program, the original New York Times article about the program only contains 3% of the actual story. 97% wasn't included. So let's talk about the 3% that was. It was originally reported that the name of the program was ATIP, and it was led by a guy named Lou Elizondo. So first, where the heck did the name ATIP come from? In his book, program director James Lukatsky writes, ATIP was a made-up substitute name to describe OSAP. A made-up name? So he's saying that ATIP
didn't even exist. That ATIP itself was a nickname, and only a nickname, to the OSAP program. So they were the exact same thing. ATIP was just a nickname, OSAP being the program.
The program was nicknamed Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP.
I mean, you talking about telling lies and creating confusion. This type of shit is ridiculous. I mean, they had this shit planned out to get them $22 million for free. And then that didn't count how much they made off the books and the interviews and all other shit, man. They racked up some real dough on this bullshit.
People have had trouble trying to get documents out of the Pentagon by saying they want all documents at ATIP, and they have a hard time because that wasn't actually the name of the program. The top name there is the actual name of the program, but ATIP was the nickname that it went by.
And even Harry Reid and the Pentagon have previously agreed with this. Reid stated in an interview that ATIP and OSAP should be considered together. When researcher Roger Glassell asked about the names ATIP and OSAP, a Pentagon spokeswoman replied that they were the same program and that OSAP was just an alternative name for ATIP. So how did ATIP become a nickname for OSAP? Well, remember how Lakatsky said he was hiding OSAP from other officials at the Pentagon? How, according to Lakatsky, they had no idea whatsoever about OSAP's activities? In their book, the authors say Senator Reid and those working at...
Shouldn't he be in jail for that shit? It doesn't all this shit seem extremely illegal? Unbelievable.
Skinwalker Ranch were worried that OSAP's activities would eventually come to light. As such, Senator Reid submitted a request that OSAP be given top secret special access status, which, if approved, would have officially limited how many people had access and control over the program. Here is the special access request letter submitted by Senator Harry Reid to Deputy Secretary of Defense William Lynn in 2009. But instead of saying OSAP, the actual program name, Reid used the nickname ATIP. But Reid's plan to protect OSAP apparently backfired. His request was denied, and his letter was widely distributed within the Pentagon. The cat was out of the bag.
Suddenly, the rest of the Pentagon, which had no idea that this program was underway, they had no idea. Suddenly, everyone knows about it, and they start asking questions. Gosh, what if this gets out that we're involved in study of UFOs and ghosts and creatures?
So two things appear to have happened here. One, Reid's letter was the first time many within the Pentagon had even heard about this program, and Reid's letter used the nickname ATIP. So according to those who were previously in the dark about all this, ATIP was the name of the program. Two, the Pentagon didn't want this embarrassing story spreading outside the Pentagon. They didn't want it in the press, and they didn't want speeches in Congress about government waste. So they moved to shut it all down. The New Yorker quotes a Pentagon official saying, "People worried that if all this came out, that the government was spending money on this will be a bad story." The Pentagon pulled OSAP's funding in 2010, and by 2012, the funding had completely dried up, and OSAP was officially dead. But despite the program being shut down, Lou Elizondo, who had become interested in the UFO aspects of OSAP, claims he kept the effort going at the Pentagon. According to James Lakatsky, Elizondo adopted and appropriated the name ATIP to describe this new, small, unfunded, and unofficial effort. Lakatsky has only done a handful of interviews since going public. Here's a revelatory clip from one of them on the Coast to Coast radio show where he specifically addresses this.
The ATIP name was created for a letter that Senator Reid sent in trying to establish a DOD SAP for our program for various reasons.
And DOD is Department of Defense.
And Lou used that name when he, and I guess it had to be in the time frame of 2012, and he used the name ATIP. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's fine. But there was a difference between the two programs. Ours had $22 million in funding, his had zero. But he did his thing, we did ours. But I can say that we were the only game in town.
So what did Lou Elizondo actually do? You know, the guy who everyone refers to as the director of ATIP, the Pentagon UFO program?
Luis Elizondo, former director of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
Luis Elizondo ran the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program.
The man who ran that secret program, Luis Elizondo, thank you for joining us.
Was he even involved in the official Pentagon program at all? In the 221-page book about the Pentagon UFO program, Elizondo appears one time. That's a bit strange, right? One time, at a 2009 dinner, sitting at a table with members of OSAP and BATS, where the authors claim he was telling war stories about his psychic powers. That's it. Well, Elizondo himself has stated multiple times on the record that he had nothing to do with OSAP, including this emphatic tweet, which says,
"It's been brought to my attention that despite my constant assertion in the media about my non-involvement in OSAP, some are under the false impression that I was part of it. For the record, again and again, I was not part of OSAP."
Elizondo instead says he was in charge of the Pentagon's ATIP program.
But ATIP was a nickname for OSAP. You see how wacky that shit get? And he said he had zero funding. See, this whole thing is just one big scam.
Which I think we've established probably didn't even exist. Insiders say it was not an official program. It was a completely separate small initiative. A small unofficial effort. Not a program as the P in ATIP suggests, but more in his spare time, when his normal day job allowed, he looked for UFOs. There are two pieces of documentation that further supports this. One is an email from the year 2020, released via the Freedom of Information Act to John Greenwald. In it, Elizondo is challenging the Pentagon press office regarding their statements denying his role with ATIP. Elizondo concedes that his ATIP could be defined more as simply an activity versus an actual program. The second is an annual Pentagon evaluation of Elizondo from the year 2016. It outlines all his officially assigned responsibilities at the Pentagon, none of which have to do with UFOs or anything called ATIP. So with all that in mind, let's look again at the Pentagon's official statement regarding Elizondo. That appears to be a true statement.
In April 2022, Brian Bender, the author of the original 2017 Politico article, tweeted that he now feels like he was purposely misled by numerous sources on what ATIP really was and wasn't. In response to a Twitter user stating, "Seems clear that they wanted to gloss over the paranormal stuff, which is like where all the money really went," Bender replied, 100%. They buried the origin story because they were afraid it would be perceived as an utter waste of taxpayer money.
And it was.
Also further soured the whole effort, given the Bigelow connection to Harry Reid. It was a pork project to investigate voodoo that morphed into UFOs.
And regarding myself and all the Basement Office episodes I've made about ATIP and Elizondo, I was apparently wrong. It wasn't intentional, but in an honest attempt to report the truth about the Pentagon UFO program, I too feel like I was purposely misled.
As for Elizondo, he, along with other former members of Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy, have been lobbying Congress to spend more money on UFOs. They say the original New York Times article continues to influence congressional leaders, since many of the paranormal aspects weren't included in that story. Chris Mellon, the guy who once stood in front of a gigantic photo of a blurry party balloon, admits that telling Congress about OSAP would be counterproductive. Their efforts appear to have paid off. Bipartisan congressional leaders like Senators Kristen Gillibrand and Marco Rubio helped create a new UFO program at the Pentagon. The new program is called the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. And another domino falls.
So the government is just wasting money. They're wasting money on trying to find aliens. If you want to, listen to me. If you want to find aliens, all you have to do is turn on your television. Or you can pick up one of your DVDs or Blu-rays or 4K Blu-rays and pop it in. That's the only place you're going to see a predator, a Ewok, a Klingon. He won't be landing in your front yard. There's nothing coming out of the sky, you guys. The only thing coming out of the sky is God and human beings coming back from lower Earth orbit. That's pretty much it. You're not going to get too much more than that. A lot of this shit they see in the sky is man-made, and sometimes it be things like balloons and all other type of wacky shit that we might not understand. Or like I said before, they see shit in the sky and it belongs to the United States government. And this whole alien thing, this video is not to prove or disprove aliens don't exist, but it is to open your eyes to what they pushing and why they're pushing it. And a lot of them people that you're seeing in videos is Luciferians. Believe it or not, they all in cahoots together, and they come up and conjure up ways where we can make money. They know that the average person, a human being, believes in aliens, especially in the United States at this point. So they're going to sell it to you wholeheartedly. And if they can get you to believe it, they get people in Congress to believe it, they're going to do more, get more funding and waste more money than you can ever imagine. Period, point blank. But I appreciate you guys tuning in, man. Hit that like. Hit that subscribe. I just took your ass on one hell of a paranormal werewolf UFOs ride. Peace.